So what's up, everybody? C4C here, and got my buddy Caleb from Alabama on here, and we're just going to be talking a little bit about Nephilim. Take a pretty easy subject and everything, but the Nephilim that's identified in Genesis chapter 6. Me and Caleb, we talk a lot about conspiracy theories, talk a lot about some unknown things in Scripture and what they could be, and Nephilim being one of those hot button topics. So Caleb, so the Nephilim is commonly referred to either as the sons of Seth and the daughters of Cain, or the line of Seth and the ungodly line of Cain, or the fallen angels view. What view do you think the Nephilim has more biblical weight to, and why?
I think it's definitely a fallen angel thing. And I've thought of this even before I looked into it a whole lot. And it mainly being why, to answer that question, is because when it's talking about the sons of God coming down to the daughters of men, that's the same, far as I know, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's the same sons of God, that word that's used over in Job when it's talking about the sons of God presenting themselves to God.
Okay.
And I don't know if humans going presenting themselves to God before the flood and all that. That doesn't make much sense. So, yeah, that's the basic answer to that question. Yeah.
What would you say about the critic that would bring up the fact where Jesus says that when we die, we are like the angels, that we're not given into marriage in heaven? Would that have any sort of weight against the fallen angel view?
I don't think so, because I think you have to, and I'm sure my sister would call me a heretic for saying this kind of stuff, but you have to read, when you read the Bible, you have to try to you got to try to read it literally in context. I think there's something else, but it's talk. You can't really get around what it's saying right here, where these sons of God come down and have offspring one way or the other with men. If people say that or if the Bible says that angels are not given in marriage, is that saying that they're not given in marriage, where they're not given spouses, or is it saying they're not able to reproduce at all? There's a difference there, right?
Okay.
Satan was not, so he was supposed to glorify God. Well, yeah, he was supposed to, but he didn't. So they can do what they're not supposed to do too. So
I know
I don't know if that question.
we talked a little bit about this in the past. How does this play any sort of role into like Greek mythology or Roman mythology?
It's I think it's the biggest answer to that stuff, that people all around the world do not just separately come up with these different stories of demigods and the mythology. These things,
Mm-hmm.
they came from somewhere. There's truth to pretty much every lie. There's truth to a lot of things that even though there's a lot of lies in stuff, and stuff is expounded on. You go fishing and your fish is this big and then it gets bigger.
Right.
But you have those demigods and those things that people from all over the world. You don't just make it up. Case in point is we have those same cultures and those same people. They have the same story, give or take some details about the flood. And as Christians, we want to be like, yeah, see, that points to the Bible. That's the flood right there. That's Noah and the ark. Well, they have the other stories too,
Right.
but we just want to write them off like, no, 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 no. Forget that stuff. The flood, that's good, but I don't care about this other stuff. Well, you got to look at it. It's there in history, and it's also here in the Bible. So you got to do something. You got to either ignore it or you got to look at it. So I like to look at it.
Yeah, I think there's some truth to that. One of the problems that a lot of people have against the fallen angel theory is when you got the 12 spies looking into the land of Canaan, the same Hebrew word there is used in reference to the size of the inhabitants there at that land. And they see, if God was trying to destroy all the fallen angels through the flood, why are there still these Nephilim here in Canaan and everything? But I personally looked at that and think of what's called the fallacy of equivocation, taking a word, and any word has a particular semantic range, a range of meanings. And just because it means one way here doesn't necessarily it means it always means the same thing everywhere else. Same thing with gospel. It's not always the death, burial, resurrection. It's merely just good news. It could be good news of anything. And so I look at that. But I do think, like you're saying, that the fallen angel view does answer one particular question, and it's here. And you got my Bible on my phone, Blue Letter Bible. In 2 Peter chapter 2, verse number 4, Peter writes, "For if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell, and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment, and spared not the whole world by Noah, but Noah, save Noah, the eighth person. And he goes on to use some illustrations. Now, my question for those that believe in this godly line of Seth, ungodly line of Cain, is it says clearly here in 2 Peter chapter 2, verse 4, that God cast these particular angels that sin down to hell, and they are reserved unto judgment. Now, my question would be twofold. Number one, who are these angels that sinned? And I think a lot of people would argue that these angels that sinned would be those that 1/3 that fell with Lucifer. But my counter to them is, Peter says that they delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. That's a past and present tense there, that these people, these demons, are currently in prison there at this moment. And we know that there's demons around the world today. You look at possession, you just look at the evil, wickedness, and everything in the world. So what group of angels would this verse be possibly speaking about? Plus, it's a segue into Peter talking about saving the world through Noah, a preacher of righteousness. And I look at that answering and clarifying that particular verse, that this is a specific group of fallen angels there. So I know we've talked about that in the past too. But let's jump a little bit now. I mean, Nephilim, we can argue, godly line of Seth, ungodly line of Cain. We can argue fallen angels. We can't be 100% certain either way. We can have our speculations based off, biblical support. But let's talk more about the UFOlogy, aliens and everything. It's sort of a similar topic. How do you think this plays a role in the second coming?
I think it's all the same underlying story throughout history. It's the same. I think it's the same thing. I think the Nephilim kind of thing, without going into a lot of detail and stuff that I don't even understand completely myself, you have different kind of those generations of those Nephilim, and different, I guess generations is a way to say it, or almost different, I don't know if it'd be different species or of them, I don't know exactly, but because you have ones before the flood, and then I think there's something happened after the flood, right? And then I think that just builds into modern day what's going on now, because see, I'm going to start to talk, and then I'm going to get into some kind of weird thing. I'm going to talk in a circle and confuse myself. But what I'm trying to say is, no, but with the Nephilim, it's a demigod-ish kind of a thing. It's a spiritual being that has a physical body that wasn't supposed to be there. God didn't create it. It's basically like an abomination of something that's made. And what is interesting with what
the concept of a demigod.
The demigod and the Nephilim thing. That I think those.
So when you're talking about demigod, are you talking about like Hercules and Percy Jackson, if you will, things like that?
Right, like that kind of stuff. When you see people with
half man, half god type thing.
Right, that kind of stuff. Right. Okay. And so the way to answer, kind of go on to your question, or the alien thing, you see the Nephilim thing back before the flood, before Jesus came. You see a lot of that stuff before, and the underlying movement of that, whatever the purpose was of those things, has changed, right? Because Jesus already came. I think there's a lot of cause and effect of God doing something and Satan trying to mess it up or unpurify or do something, and then that doesn't work, so he moves on to something else. I think that's why you don't see that same kind of Nephilim thing today. So now we have this.
So you're looking at part of the fallen angel view of Genesis 6 is the fact of the view that Satan is trying to corrupt the seed of Christ, the lineage and everything.
That's personally what I think, yeah.
Okay, and so you're looking at this more like different ways Satan can try to disrupt or corrupt the gospel, the words of Christ. Is that what you're looking at?
Right.
Okay.
A lot of that, yeah. And also just to cause doubt and confusion of people in general. Because if you have God, right, and you have angels that that they worship and glorify God and they serve God, and then you have us. Okay, well, if you can, and there's only God, if you can add other beings, other things that are as powerful as God, or as they have abilities and they have wisdom and they want to help human beings, that kind of is what
So
the
you're talking
weird
about
underlying message of aliens, what they
you're
do.
talking about some sort of like, not really, but sort of like an evolution of sense, like a God man in between us, the angels, some sort of
Yeah.
God man sitting here type deal.
Kind of, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Because what's interesting is when you look at aliens, right, and you really look at what people say they do. People get either abducted, and a lot of that they're kind of into two splitting factions of it. Either there's some weird sexual reproduction, probing, weird experimentation side of it,
Right.
and then you also have this side where they're teaching you something. They're trying to enlighten you.
I want to interject for a moment. I remember, it had to have been like 10, 15 years ago. I read an abduction account. You might be able to find it. I want to say the website or whatever was like Phoenix or Phoenix 2 or something like that. But it was titled The Abduction of Bob, B-O-B, The Abduction of Bob. And just some of the things that he reported, like when he was asked to draw an illustration of what the spaceship looked like, he explained that it was like a grilled cheese sandwich. And so someone drew a grilled cheese sandwich and he cut it like in the middle. He's like, no, it wasn't like it was like if you cut it diagonally. And then he talked about the alien turning into Pamela Anderson and then turning back after. So I don't know how far-fetched that particular case is, but that one just stuck in my mind. Just how out there is it? So do you think aliens are real? Do you think abduction cases are real? Or what is it about them? And what do you think Bob may have actually encountered?
With the abduction thing, I think it's very real. I think aliens are real, and you have to take a step back and I have to define alien, right? Because I think if you use ET, right, like in the movie ET extraterrestrial, it's something that's not from Earth. It's extraterrestrial.
Okay.
So
right.
God is ultimately the first ET because he's not of Earth. He's outside, right?
Never heard of that. Yeah.
It really that kind of unlocks your brain to be like, okay, now I can see what to define that. I'm not talking about little green men that evolved on different planets. You have God who is extraterrestrial. Yeah. He's not bound by any of the things that we're bound by. He's God.
It's just
right.
You're making a very good point, valid point. I just think of ET phone home.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
You're right. We have these wrong ideas of words and everything. But no, I see what you're saying. All right, so extraterrestrial, right?
So if that's God being the first extraterrestrial, he also created angels sometime between God being by himself and creation of Earth, because the angels sang and whatever, that they gave glory to God.
Right.
So those are also ETs because they weren't created on Earth. They're not earthly beings. So that kind of goes into this whole Nephilim thing again. That's why it all ties in this big weird circle to where you have those angels come down and create this other Nephilim thing, which is, like I said before, it's an abomination. It's like an ET and a human doing this thing, making this thing, and you have nowadays, it's the same thing. Those demons, except for the specific ones that were bound, like you read there in Peter, there's still demonic stuff going on. There's still these forces and these spirits, or these, whatever you want to call them, They're still there. And they do the same. To me, it's the same kind of thing that was going on ish. That's why I don't really know, but the same kind of thing of mixing of themselves and humans. That's really what I think the ETs are. And when you look into the whole alien,
when you're saying that, are you saying that you think the aliens are like a half breed of a person and an angel, or do you think the aliens are something else?
I think it's very. I don't. This is complete speculation. I'm not going to claim that I've been abducted and I've been informed of all this stuff. And I'm
because there's like 25 different races of aliens.
I know. And see, that's what gets so weird, because you also have races and levels of angels, right? You have archangels. You got the other ones. You have them. They're there, and people. You can draw straight not analogies, but they go across the board. You have the angels in their different classes. You also have these aliens in their classes. And what's weird is when you start looking into these alien classes, the higher you go, the more advanced you get. They become these tall, beautiful beings of light. And it's weird because the Bible talks about Satan being able to manifest himself as angel of light. And the Bible never, I don't remember, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think the Bible ever said that Satan was transformed into like the devil with pitchforks and just looks evil and mean. It's talked about him being beautiful and just being appealing, right?
Right. Yeah.
So when you talk, when you have these different levels of aliens or whatever people want to call them, you do have lesser forms. I think they have the gray guys that go around and abduct people, and then you have the Nordic people, which are just beautiful and they're smart and they're wise, and then you have the other level. You have the reptilian race, and they change the way they look. Mm-hmm. And so what I think personally, the higher you go up on those scales, that's the closer you're getting towards just demons, and Satan himself and that kind of thing. The further you go down, I think that's what you're talking about with Bob being abducted. I think a lot of those abductions, and what's weird when you look into those abductions, with a lot of them being focused around reproduction and that aspect, which is weird. Why? Like, why do people make up that? Like, is it just because it's sensational? Or is there something to do with the genes of people that they're trying to get out of people because they can't reproduce? Like the Bible says, they're not given in marriage. However that works, they don't have the spouses, and maybe they can't reproduce within and among themselves, but they can do stuff with people. So you have men who somehow or other they have sex or whatever they want to call it with a female-looking person, alien thing, or what's even weird, and I don't know, I've never met anybody personally, so I can't speak to actually being able to ask them the questions, but you have women who are impregnated one way or the other, and then in a couple months or something, they get abducted again, and the baby's gone. They go to the doctor, and the doctor's like, "No, you don't have a baby."
Of that? I mean, how could that even be?
I can't give the specific names, but I mean, I've heard of testimonies of people saying that. So
let me ask you this.
Yeah.
So are you leaning towards some sort of like hybrid possibility?
I think that's a lot of what you see nowadays as far as
opposed to just like Satan or like demons just transforming themselves, if you will, shape-shifting.
I think there's a mix. I think there's a definite mix. I think there is.
So say aliens were real, okay?
Mm-hmm. What kind of aliens?
True aliens like the Greys, the Green aliens, Nordics. Say those are real. Would that have any implications on Scripture or on God or on Jesus?
I don't think so at all.
Why not?
Because we have, I mean, you can scrub aside all the alien and all the conspiracy stuff. The Bible stands by itself. It's always proven itself correct. No matter how many times people try to say it contradicts itself or whatever, time after time with what it says and the prophecies and everything it gives, it is true. So you could even add in aliens to all that, but the Bible's still true, right? So Scripture itself holds fast. You could introduce aliens and supernatural other things into it, but it doesn't shake what the Bible actually says.
So would you think these like hybrids would be godly, ungodly, have a choice? Would they be pawns of Satan?
I think it's
we've never talked about this aspect of it, so
I don't think we have.
No, we haven't.
What I really think when it comes down to it, mm-hmm. It's weird when you look in the past, you look in history, right, and you see these different things. Like I said before, it seems like it's this cosmic chess match in a way. I don't like to use that term because God and the devil are not at all equal. But God does something, Satan tries to mess it up or tries to counteract. And God does something, Satan tries to counteract. And you can see that through history, right? Okay. And it kind of comes up to like World War II, and Satan's like, okay, I'm going to kill the Jews so they can't call back Jesus. And then that doesn't work. And so it's almost like we're living in the last chapter of history, as it were, because we're waiting basically on the rapture, which is imminent. I mean, everything is fulfilled to the point to where the rapture is going to happen.
See, I want to stop right there for a minute. So a lot of critics, they'll talk about, God, the Bible says Jesus could come back imminently or, at any moment. And it's been 2,000 years and he still hasn't come back, blah, 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 blah. A lot of people misunderstand that word imminent to mean that Jesus Christ, could come back, within 5 years, is coming back that soon. It's not a matter of soonness, if you will. It's a matter of all steps are aligned, all stars are aligned. He could come back at any moment. And so a lot of people misunderstand that, saying he hasn't come back in 2,000 years, he ain't coming back. it's not a matter of time. It's a matter of situations. All the situations, dominoes are laid out, and he could come back now at any moment. And so, I just wanted to put that out there. But go on.
Right, and so with us living in that last chapter, right, of post, I guess, I would say post World War II, because I don't think anything
now,
drastic.
World War II is interesting. World War II is interesting when you get to Operation Paperclip.
It is. You could talk for days about that, about World War II and what exactly that's about. And I think in order to talk about that, you kind of have to go back to how Pastor Ken, what we learned about here at Open Door, about the unpardonable sin. Because without understanding that, even that in and of itself sheds light on the whole Nephilim thing.
Well, that's going to be a video for another time and everything.
Okay, so try to not talk about that. With World War II, it really, you see a lot of, it's so weird. You see a lot of alien whatever, or
the occult.
Definitely the occult, but you see a lot of that manifesting itself. It's almost like it's all been under the surface for long periods of time, and all of a sudden World War II comes up, and it just starts bubbling, and it's almost like you can see Satan and all them, whatever, they're excited because they're saying, "Oh my word, we have the opportunity to wipe out the Jews right here. We got this guy who's got this Nazi empire, and he is inches away from fulfilling this, like, worldwide, history-wide, whatever you want, biblical scale just thing. And if he can kill the Jews, ooh boy." So you can see all the stops being pulled out, and the different things of people saying that aliens came and gave the Nazis technology like they shouldn't have had. Like, they were so just beyond their time in the different stuff they had, even with like the bell, the
anti-gravity machine.
Yeah, and it's there, and people see it, and there's pictures of it, and you have scientists talk about it, like you're talking about Operation Paperclip, like you're talking. Those scientists come back over to the United States, and I don't remember if it was within a couple of years or whatever, but then in the United States you start seeing UFOs, you start seeing these bells flying around. You're like, what in the world?
So just a little segue into another video. What you were talking about was specifically the Holocaust and the Jews, and Satan seeing this as a prime time. If people were to read passages such as in the book of Zechariah, or I think it's Revelation chapter 17, where the remnant of the Jewish people go hide in a place called Basra near Petra, because that Jewish remnant is the one that's going to call for Jesus to come back, and that's his second advent's not going to be predicated on anything but the Jewish leadership recognizing him as a Messiah and to call him back. So that'll be another video we'll talk about, but that's what you're meaning as far as him seeing a prime opportunity to kill Jews.
Yep, because I don't know. I don't want to get on. If you want to do another video on that, I'm trying not to elaborate on that a whole much. But that is, I don't think in history there's much of another time that was that close in modern history that was that close to happening. Because old time, they were the nation of Israel was cut up, diced up, and thrown all over the world.
Although there were a lot of Jews elsewhere, but definitely I agree with what you're saying and everything. So I want to try to go ahead and wrap this up and everything. So pretty much encapsulate, summarize, Genesis 6, the fallen angel view, just, 5 minutes or so. What is that view, and why do you believe that view, and how does that play a role to today?
Yeah. Okay, so like I said, if you kind of got to see it as almost like a chess match between God and Satan. Again, I don't like using that because they're not equals. It wouldn't be a fair match. But you have God creating earth, Satan falling from heaven or being kicked out of heaven for wanting to be God, for wanting to be like God, and not in a good way, but in a bad way of wanting to be better than God, or whatever, however you want to say that. So he falls from heaven, and so it seems like from that point on, God has his beautiful creation, and it's perfect in every way that it can be. People have free will and everything, and then Satan gets in there, and the first thing he does is he deceives Adam and Eve, whatever, he convinces them, whatever, you eat the fruit, and they sin, and that introduces sin into the world. After that, it's like, okay, God's going to send a son, his son, to save mankind, and these are what I believe, and some of the people might have different beliefs, but God's going to send his son, so then Satan is like, whether it's him or the other fallen angels that have this idea, to corrupt the seed of mankind, to corrupt the genetics of mankind, to basically be like, okay, we're going to mess this up so bad that there are no more humans to save, because Jesus had to be a person to die for our sin. You couldn't sacrifice sheep and stuff because they did that up to that point, but a human had to be the sacrifice for mankind.
Okay, according to the book of Hebrews, I guess, where it says that sacrifices, blood of bulls and goats were only temporary.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
And so now you're leading up to Genesis 6.
So that goes into Genesis 6, to where the angels come down and they start this corruption of mankind, and they start the mixing of species and the mixing of people and animals, or people and aliens or demons, whatever. They make this thing, and God says, no, that's not going to happen. So he goes to the flood, and that's where I believe with Noah, he was obviously, I would say, he was a godly man, but also pure in his generation. I believe that truly has a lot to do with him being a human and not having corrupted genes in his system. Now, I personally hold that belief very strongly. And so the flood comes, wipes out that generation of Nephilim. After the flood, that you have I believe you really have a reintroduction, not by fallen angels. I don't think there's any proof of that at all. But I think what a lot of this genetic stuff going on, and I think that's what
cloning and everything.
Yeah, with cloning, and I think a lot of the sin of the people right before the flood, Noah's preaching to these people to stop and to turn away from their wickedness. I think a lot of that has to do with them trying to be like those demigod things and trying to make themselves, whether somehow genetically, trying to make themselves like that, trying to be like, instead of being like God.
Okay.
See, that's a big deal.
Right.
And I think, and it doesn't really matter one way or the other, but it does feed into this whole line of the story. And so after the flood, somebody somewhere along the lines figured out how to do that again, the genetic thing, not with the angels, but with genetically. And I think case in point is Nimrod. It talks about him becoming to be one of these men. So he's not one initially. He becomes to be one of these great Nephilim kind of things.
Okay.
And so that is like chapter 2 in this book of history, to where you have the Tower of Babel. Whatever happened there, I don't know. There's lots of speculation what they were trying to do, but it was bad. Go ahead.
Another video.
Yeah, but it was bad enough that God said, no, I'm going to put a stop to it. God doesn't come down to earth to put a stop to things very much.
So do you think it was more than just them not scattering after the flood like they were supposed to? You think it was more to it?
I think there was a lot more to it. I think there's a lot more to it. And so that would be like chapter 2 or chapter 3, because that didn't work. And then the nations are all spread around, and then everybody spreads out, the languages change. And I think that's when you start to see different. You see the Nephilim change from being like this demigod thing pre-flood. Post-flood, you have kind of people trying to do the same thing, and that doesn't happen. So post the Tower of Babel, up to the time of Israel, there's weird stuff that goes on there, but it's not as big and drastic as all these other Nephilim stuff going on.
Right.
And I believe when it comes to the people of Israel going into Canaan, I think. And you and I probably have a little bit differing opinions on this, but I think a lot of that genetic stuff was going on because Satan's not just sitting there on his butt just waiting for God to come back. He's actively trying to defeat God one way or the other. And so it makes sense to me, and when you look at other books, not just the Bible, but other books of history of these giants in the land, right? And it talking about them being not just big, tall, 9-foot people, but giants. It makes it
like
kind of
the beanstalk giant you're talking about.
Whether they're that tall, I can't remember if it's in Psalms or whatever. And I know people got to be careful when you read in Psalms and take things literally, because it's Psalms, it's poems, it's not completely literal how it is. But it talks about them being as tall as the trees of Lebanon, the cedars, which are like 30 to 100 feet tall. Okay. You could just be saying, yeah, they're tall, or you could be comparing them to something that you can see. It's 30 to 100 feet tall, which would make sense if the people of Israel the spies going into these lands, they see these 50 feet tall giants. They're like, yeah, we're not going in there right now because that's suicide. Right. But then, because it would be obvious that they can't defeat them. But then you have Caleb and Joshua, not just Caleb because that's my name, but you have Caleb and Joshua saying, no, we have God on our side. We're going to go do this. We can do it. Right. So anyway, that kind of slowed down my story. But you see that part of the Nephilim thing happen, and then Jesus comes, and it kind of changes again to where the Nephilim thing isn't so big, But you have, once Jesus is born, Herod, for one reason or other, and you could explain it just normally because he didn't want another king to boot him out of his power, but he tried to kill all the babies.
All the 2-year-olds, 2 and under.
Right. And so after that, you have Jesus' life, and Satan gets very involved there. And then after Jesus ascends into heaven, then you have the massive attack on the Jewish people, right, throughout history and all this stuff, until nowadays you have a lot, and it's getting more and more of the alien thing. That's where it's kind of coming full circle. You have more and more, as we get closer to nowadays, you get more and more of this alien thing, especially after like World War II. You have some pictures and stuff of some, like, you look at Roman Catholic art and stuff, you got some weird, possibly alien kind of stuff going on. But the more you get into nowadays, you're seeing a lot of this stuff, and not only people seeing it, but it's being very much inundated through media, through the videos we watch and all that.
So how does that play a role into like the coming of Christ and the rapture?
I think, personally, whenever the rapture happens, some way or the other, it's going to be very easily explained by the opposite side, by the devil and all that cohort thing, the dark side, however you want to call it. It's going to be easily explained that, that either aliens abducted the people, or they were just slowing down the evolution of mankind, and they have to go. And it's even weird looking at the last, and spoiler alert, looking at the last Marvel movie that came out.
I haven't seen it yet.
You haven't seen it? Okay.
You talking about Infinity Wars?
Yeah.
No, I'm a huge Thor fan.
I'm not going to give it away. You see the movie, you see what happens. That is weird. That is very weird. Talk about all this stuff. I'm not going to say any more about that. But you have all that stuff going on, and it seems like it's coming to a head. It's coming to a culmination of, you can't keep this stuff quiet for very much longer. You have so many conspiracies about the governments of mankind working with these alien things. I've heard interviews of people who've worked with these underworld kind of societies that have conventions or whatever. They have meetings off-world or whatever. They have meetings with alien races, and the aliens, their story is basically they were kicked out of their original place, came to Earth, and they're preparing for a massive battle. The person that kicked them out is going to come. And this is coming from just a guy that worked with these things. It's like, that is...
But how credible could that be? Well, I think that's enough for right now, though, okay?
Yeah.
We're going to do some more videos and everything. We got to save some stuff for later and whatnot. But, so, Nephilim, what do you make of it? Godly line of Seth, ungodly line of Cain. How does it play a role in the return of Christ when you look at the Jews and you understand Jewish context of the Gospels and just what the unpardonable sin is, what it was, and the fact that you, me, or Caleb, even Caleb, can't commit the unpardonable sin today. And so thank God for that. But when you understand that, you'll see how Nephilim could possibly go full circle, like Caleb's been saying. But that's it for today. We're going to do some more videos. Hopefully, you good with this? You want to do some more videos, Caleb?
Yeah, we'll do some more.
I think it's pretty good.
All day long.
I got a buddy of mine named Russ in the Traveling Berean YouTube channel. Going to get with him and talk about some false religions and cults, specifically Mormonism and the Hebrew Black Hebrew Israelites, which is kind of a racial cult, false religion. So stay tuned for those. And until next time, I thank you for watching. God bless.